Hi, everyone. Welcome to the October OpenSLO meeting. If you have the notes are in the invite, and if you haven't already, just go ahead and sign in if you could, so we can keep track of that. We also have our agenda in there. So we have a couple things on the docket for this week. I think, Mariusz, you had 168 and 169 that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, at a high level, I'm guessing we also want to discuss the PR for the 178, the related data sort bits. That's why I put it
in. Cool. Yeah, so do you want to take it away with 170 or 168, 169?
Sure. So the gist of it is, it's clear to me that with the introduction of the SLI object, the pattern became possible of creating a single SLI object and multiple attached SLO objects, which made it as an equivalent functionality to having a single OpenSLO object specifying multiple targets and or multiple time windows. So now having multiple SLOs is like multiple SLO targets basically is possible either way, either single SLO object, and historically, because those are lists, multiple targets, multiple windows, or single SLI, multiple SLO objects. If we want to prefer the single SLI and multiple SLO patterns, then it would follow that specifying target and specifying window not as a list might be a thing we want to do. Not, mind you, instead of by completely removing the possibility of specifying multiple, but in the same way that we have target and target percent, which is either one. You can't use both. You can use either one or the other. 168 and 169 essentially would suggest if you don't want to specify multiple targets or multiple time windows, then use the simpler version without a list. I'm not going to die on this hill. I just think it sort of makes sense as an option in the syntax, the same how we went with target percent. That's basically my full argument for both changes. If it's not sufficient, then I can drop the issues, but hopefully my charisma and personal charm are doing work.
But for me, it's instead of simplifying it, it's just complicating it by making two fields when the second is always better option because you can do both. Like I said with Kubernetes example, you always have volumes even if you have one, and yeah, and for me it's why to have two fields? Even if they don't have to exist in the same, they shouldn't exist in the same time in spec.
Well, the argument here is that the OpenSLO specification is sort of overcomplicated by design because we don't necessarily expect all implementations to support all of it. So from my perspective, an implementation by dev that just limits itself to if you want multiple SLOs, you have to define multiple SLO objects because we support only single target and single window per SLO. Then you don't have to implement the list and sort of be confusing to your users. It's a wider discussion of backward compatibility that we probably need to have along with the next point. I just would be really happy if that was a feature that we sort of supported, like a super simple syntax, and then, hey, and there's this alternative you can use if you want to do all of the things. I don't know. I don't think we're settled on how we want to I don't know, we have a philosophy on this bit, basically. Jakub, what would yours be in the context of your change?
Yeah, from my perspective, your argument about implementing, for example, one time window or one objective and not using list for it, whether it's expected only one item because this implementation support this way is very valid. But on the other hand, I agree with the Philip that basically list works always, and even when you have one and in future you may want two, you probably go with the list because in future the diff in your editor will be just simpler because you just add an item to the list, and as in Kubernetes you have volumes, you attach multiple or one. You have environment variables, it's also the list one or multiple, and here for me it's also because having alternative syntax leads us to the way that when some implementation will support all of them, they would like to have a sort of style guide or of a linter to do it this preferred way when it become bigger. And I'm in the rather in the group of people who thinking that standard should be narrower than wider when it's need to be. For example, you know, like in Go, you have one way of doing things, not like, for example, in other language when you have multiple way and later you have to enforce them to make it one way by everybody. So this is my thinking about this time windows and about time windows and about objectives, because on the other hand, with those data sources, your point was very valid, and I tried to simplify it because I carried the same meaning and the same feeling, but with dropping unnecessary fields. So yes, but what other things about it? Maybe we can, for example, do some kind of the poll or wider discussion next to the issues.
Yeah, like how do we settle this? Because like, okay, there's a few people here.
We can make, I don't know, we
Is
can.
that quorum enough to just drop it, or I don't know?
You know, I do think that what you said earlier about that we probably have a larger question around how we want to handle kind of backwards compatibility of things. And it sounds, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, like we might also have a question about how do we want to enable implementations to deviate as well, and how, to what degree do we want to favor something that gives them two possible approaches to implement, or if we want to favor more of like a kind of, if you remember the extensions model for Kubernetes, where you have just different API versions that are like just a variant on another API version or something like that. I'm not that I'm necessarily trying to open up that can of worms in particular, but it does sound, as somebody kind of coming into this, like there is a larger question of what should our general philosophy be when we encounter these sorts of things. These are not going to be the only sort of cases like this that we're going to encounter as this continues to evolve.
Yeah, and in the context of the data source PR, it did cross, like, it would be awesome if it was implementable in a way that's not fully, that's not incompatible with the way 1.0 was? Like, is it, since you're already changing indicator to SLI and indicator ref to SLI ref, so there's no collision there, is it possible to have data source and v2 or something like that that is defined this way? I sort of don't like it, because then you have to use data source v2 to get the better syntax forever. Maybe it's doable in a way where your keywords do not conflict with the previous keywords on their data source, and therefore you could sort of implement both ways, and we mark the current way as deprecated, but you can support it if you wish to. That would be, for me, the ideal solution of implementing it, assuming that's doable.
And not just to chime in on that, if we are to continue looking at the Kubernetes example there, it wouldn't necessarily be forever. I mean, we've seen as how Kubernetes has continued to change its API versions, moving some things into core that used to be as part of it under extensions. There's still annotations even that are marked as alpha or beta, but with a prefix as well. And then the general beat is, once major versions are hit, then the things that have become well used and considered standard get moved into just as into the norm. Again, I also think that does introduce quite a bit of complexity. So I'm not necessarily saying that is what we want to do, but just adding that in as color, saying that if we do come up with a different sort of API identity for this approach, it doesn't necessarily have to be forever. It just means that there's kind of two approaches until such time as we want to make a major version bump.
Like, quick take, I'm very sad we didn't sort of start with that. It would have made some of these discussions much simpler if we actually like versioned some of the additions like data source, etc., and could like be freer to still evolve them instead of having them been frozen as OpenSLO v1. It would have made it easier now. Now I don't know. Like, I would really, really love that PR in one way or the other to be incorporated. I don't know how. And like I haven't thought before on the bit of use the Kubernetes like versioning of extensions, etc. Maybe it would be applicable. I'd have to think it through to have any opinion at this point. Sounds cool, basically. Maybe that PR is a way to introduce it. I don't know, like test run the extensions thing.
All right. So where are we feeling on this then? Like, like Kuba, Philip, Oleg, how do you guys feel about that?
I just joined, so I mostly listen to study how you work here.
Okay. So did we want to try it then?
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. Like if we see better approach, and like I think spec is not that like old, we could try go for it. Like, it's better to have better changes than later.
Yeah, fast sooner is better because it's not so onboarded, right?
And I guess one of the benefits is if we put a different API version and then eventually we decide we don't like the API version approach and it becomes a pain, we can just roll it into the main thing. After that, we can get rid of the API version and just say we promoted it as part of the main thing and we're not doing API extensions anymore.
Okay.
So like in this particular case, the option would be to name the data source object something else, not data source v2, just like something that sort of sounds like data source but isn't exactly,
Mhm.
and use that object as the extension object so there's no collision. And
Or would
Yeah.
we mark the API version as an extension? Because I think that's the way Kubernetes normally did it, was that it had it namespace the API version under something like extensions or something.
so like the current data source object would be data source v1, like data source OpenSLO v1, and the new one would be data source extension v1 alpha.
No, sorry, let me see if maybe I can let's see. So we have the API version field at the top. So right now it sets OpenSLO v1, and that you could make an adjustment so that you leave the current data source alone and you don't do anything to it, because that is the OpenSLO v1 data source. And then you could have something like beta.OpenSLO v1 or something like that, which then becomes the next API version. It's the kind is still data source. It's all that is the same. It just has a different API version slug. And then in the future, when we want to go to v2, we can make a decision whether or not that becomes the preferred way. And then when we go to v2, it just doesn't get namespaced anymore.
So more like
but-
OpenSLO /v2 alpha, essentially, because
Yeah.
we theorizing about how to change it
Yeah.
for v2.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And then an implementation can keep both versions supported, both v1 and v2. Kubernetes is smart.
And I have a question, like, how do we want to handle it in like in our repo? Like right now, our spec is in README, and how we will like support both APIs? Like not support, but how do we will like show it to the reader that we've got the implementations of API?
I would do it like as a bottom, a section v2 alpha or something, and then we would put all the stuff that we want to play with, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
but
clear
there-
to any implementator then that, hey, like the top of the section would be, this is optional. If you don't implement it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sure. Makes sense.
Yeah, I like it. Cool. All right. PR 178, the simplified syntax for data source indicator, which I think, Mariusz, that was also you? No.
I added to the agenda under assumption that if I didn't, Jakub would. So
Okay.
Yeah, and I added this PR as a proposition for the issue created about simplifying it, and we are a little bit too verbose in this, and I proposed a way how we can achieve the same with less boilerplate, and basically now it should be adjusted because it's not v2 alpha, it's just like that. But this is why I created it as a draft, because I haven't known how we would like to carry of it. But basically we can look in this PR and I can answer any questions.
before, did we settle then that you like that this is the way forward? This is the way we want to like experiment with new changes. The way of let's try to like cram it somewhere in between the current spec. Let's not do that. Instead, let's try this, right?
Yeah, I think so.
v2 alpha 1, basically.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's a sweet spot to do it like that it's easy to discover, it's easy to manage, it's easy to be future compatible for volunteers with alpha. Is understandable that it can change.
Except that's true only for the part of your change that deals with the data source object. It's not with your changes to the SLO object, where you change the ref from indicator to SLI. So how do we do that?
Oh, this is a good question.
Mark it directly in the spec as, hey, if you want to support our experimental data source v2, then you need to also support this bit in the v1. I don't know.
Can be like that, or maybe we can support, we can mark this one field as a deprecated but supported, and the second one as a field, hey, use this because we align our naming convention to be more straightforward, because this is my thinking that when we refer to the specific kind by name in the before this ref keyword, we should put this kind name and not something else, because it, yeah, we have SLI and we have kind SLI. SLI ref refers to the SLI, and indicator ref, some more people more familiar with SLO know that it probably refers to the SLI, but why to add this cognitive complexity when you can be straightforward, right? And have this convention everywhere. So I think we can handle it this way.
So, one thought that I have is, I think it might be good to, because these aren't backwards compatible, having it in a separate branch until we're ready to release v2.
Yeah,
it will be hidden.
Yeah, this is the biggest disadvantage, that it will be hidden and not easily discoverable to someone who visits OpenSLO and wants to learn more about everything. Yeah,
I would keep it on the main branch, maybe in a separate file that's linked from the main file, like, and v2 alpha part of the spec is click here, not a separate.
Yeah.
Well, because I was going to say, somebody coming to OpenSLO, though, we would probably want to show them the stable version of the API rather than all versions.
Yeah. So what Mariusz proposed, that basically, but from this main page, this alpha, this experiment and show and so on should be easy to access, because when you visit the project, probably you don't go through branches and try to find some branches and so on. You think that main is the current newest version, and maybe some older tags are the stable one. But here in our specific use case, when we have standard documented this way, as Mariusz proposed, to have this and link to the v2 would be to the v2 alpha would be something.
In addition, when we merge the v2 finals into the spec, it won't be a replacement. We'll still keep the spec for the v1 versions, because like it will be just like data source v1 and data source finalized v2 still in the spec, I'm thinking.
Yeah. So I was going to add that, because if you look at kind of what we've done with the schema validation code, we have that nested under the version slug as well. So we got v1. So the idea in that design was that all of our versions would just kind of be co-located in there. I think I would favor that anything that we're bringing in that is part of these sort of extensions would still be merged into main, but it's namespaced under its other different locations. So if, you know, it would be not under V1 schemas, it would be under the V2 schemas. And probably the easiest way of just making that very clear to people is that, you know, we put at the very top of the README, our current supported version is V1, and that, you know, we are continuing to develop, do future work in the V2.
But how does the proposal for within still V1 deprecating the indicator node tag and like promoting adding the SLI, like it should be like V1.1 or something, but like for the ease of, like, I would like to put it directly in V1, but I worry about the implications.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's a couple ways we could go about that. I don't necessarily have a strong preference there. I think one way is that we could say, well, we're only really showing major versions and in the API version slugs. And that means that we can make additional changes to V1 as long as they're always backwards compatible changes. And a deprecated field is a backwards compatible change that shouldn't be an issue. The other approach we could take is that we also create an alpha version of the SLO for the ref as well, which gets a little more complicated, but there's kind of two ways we could take there. But that's kind of my thoughts.
Okay.
I like option A better. I'm capturing, by the way, all the options that we're discussing.
Does
Thank you.
anyone here have a strong objection to the idea that we can make changes to V1 as any changes we want to V1 specs as long as they are 100% backwards compatible?
No,
Yeah.
I think that that's actually a preferred way of doing it. Like if
Yeah.
there's anything that we need to do to it that again is backwards compatible, yeah, I think we should be able to do that.
So then I think then that leaves it pretty clear that, yeah, we should just adjust the V1 version by adding in the new field. We can document that this is the preferred, but the other is still supported, and then merge that straight into the current version of V1.
Yeah, we should make sure to also just make note when we're doing that the old one will be deprecated.
Agreed. Yeah.
By the schema, adding of the schema was great. We started using it internally in the tooling we're working on. It's awesome that exists now.
Awesome.
No, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the next thing once I get to it, now that I've finally got on board onto my new job here, but I think the next thing it'd be really good to work on is try to see if we can experiment with some ways to use that schema to kind of auto-generate some of our documentation. I have some ideas of how we might be able to do that. That might make our lives of maintaining things up to date a little more straightforward too.
Oh, wait, creating documentation from the OpenSLO devs.
No, so with the schema definition, being able to use that, because the schema JSON schema supports example stanzas, and we could use the example stanzas for those blocks of code that we are putting in our README. And then it all kind of originates from the same file potentially, and we could maybe set up something with CI that would templatize our README and pull those out. Just an idea that I'm kicking around, still kind of in the germ, but want to experiment with.
That'd be cool. All right, cool. Next, Oleg, I think you put this on here about Captain and OpenSLO. You want to take it away?
Yeah, just a second. I need to fix the background audio, unless you like this music.
All right.
Could you please go elsewhere? Daniel, could you please go to the kitchen? Just a second. Sorry.
All good, man.
In the meantime, so it's a hard no on 1680 and 169, or do we have any mechanism to have a wider ask than, like, if there was no support in the issues themselves, and here there's no support, then that's basically, yeah, no. Because there wasn't any pluses on the PR issues, I think. Nope. No pluses,
Well-
no smiley faces.
Okay. I'll be honest, for those two, I'm kind of indifferent. Like, I don't like, I think, like you said, I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm fine either way with them.
Yeah, and that's what I would like to avoid. Like, me being pro, say Jakub being against, and everybody was meh, so we don't do it. And I don't know how to.
So you prefer like hard opinion, right? So yeah.
Yeah, a shouting match. Ideally.
Okay. So for me, it's like no, because for me it's complicating things and makes them unclear. I don't like things that can be done in two ways. Why?
Well, granted, now I have I'm dreaming about like a OpenSLO / V1 Mariusz, which would implement it, but.
Yeah, we could go for like I thought like about it, like we could go for OpenSLO V1 / like simplified or something like that, like the simplest way of defining SLO, and maybe someone would catch up that.
In principle, that would be doable within the experimentation bits of, like, I could like simplify like simplify.openslo / v1 alpha 1, and I could like go ham at it and see if there's any. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that's kind of great about that sort of Kubernetes approach is the fact that it really just kind of lets the community decide by which one of the future things they're actually using. That kind of tends to win out in the long run. Like, it's a great way to kind of bring something else in when you have actual use cases for it, to be able to still use it. And
okay, in that case, I'll just close them with like insufficient support for like doing the change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just keep in mind that this Kubernetes approach is actually quite heavy for alpha beta releases. So basically there is two parts, just versioning schema and also the policy for delivering changes. So for example, if you land beta, then you commit to maintain it for something like 6 months in the current release, and to keep it compatible. For GA, it's even more pain in this. So this is probably the part I would advise to not adopt for now, unless there is a strong need.
I think to some degree, we don't necessarily need to worry about that quite as much, since this is ultimately a standard spec, as opposed to in Kubernetes, where they're committing to cross-functional implementation support and actual code there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Oleg?
Yeah, I can briefly summarize what I'm actually talking about. So we already had a quick sync up with Jan before. So here I represent the Captain project. So Captain is basically one of the ways for cloud native operations in Kubernetes, and not only. So basically it automates various use cases, including quality gates, including pre and post deployment checks, auto remediation, and basically we call Captain an extension on the top of observability. So basically it takes observability to automation. And basically Captain initially was built around SLOs. So we have our own formats for defining SLIs, SLOs. We have some interfaces, and we also have some integrations with other systems through cloud events. So in this project, there were a few discussions about adopting OpenSLO already. But just to share what's going on in the project right now. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
So in Captain, if you haven't seen it before, it's the website, but yeah, it has massive, it's focused mostly on operations and SRE use cases, and basically SLIs, SLOs are in the core functionality of Captain. So dashboards is, let's say, rather fancy added value, sometimes for managers, sometimes for engineers, but whole the operation within Captain, including architecture, eventing, etc., is actually driven by SLOs at the moment. And the project started before OpenSLO started. Nevertheless, now we actually reconsidering some parts of Captain. So, for example, Captain has a component which basically connects to observability providers and then evaluates SLIs, SLOs. And what we were thinking about is to generalize this component as a separate project, sub-project within Captain. So basically, it would have a service for all the validation, etc. It would have adapters we have right now implemented, but then it would expose information in standard formats and basically make it a building block for many systems, not just Captain. Because, for example, we have demand in our own project inside Dynatrace. We want to use it separately for some bits, and also there are many other companies reaching out. So here, in addition to our SLIs, SLOs, we would also like to adopt OpenSLO as one of the options. So we had some discussions before that basically we would need some changes to make it happen. So discussion about OpenSLO v2 is something I'm definitely interested to participate in. And also we would like to probably upstream what we have for eventing, because currently Captain has cloud events where you send specific events, for example, SLO evaluations, warnings, new calculations, etc., etc. And basically cloud events is one of the standard ways to communicate right now in cloud native environment. So maybe we were thinking whether we could contribute these parts back to OpenSLO, adjust to the configuration format, etc., and basically also make it a part. And one bit is, of course, OpenTelemetry integration for observability purposes, so that you can basically even closer the loop. So basically send observability back to observability provider, and then basically every system would be able to reuse it from there. So this is what we have currently cooking. So full disclaimer, we still do some evaluations for this project in the community. So there is a lot of interested people, several companies, adopters who would be interested to have it. So most likely we will start the project. And basically this is a slide deck I was showing to Jan maybe 2 weeks ago. When we were basically starting getting more serious about this project. So there is a few items we have on the list that we would actually need in OpenSLO to make it happen. So first of all, one of the issues in Captain that we don't support SLO budgets at the moment. So OpenSLO has these parts of the specification, but the approach in Captain was always that we actually rely on external observability provider to bring this data. So to make to formally adopt the specification, basically we would need a kind of additional algorithm introduced, which basically says that yeah, we don't evaluate SLO budgets. And what I was basically talking about before is capability flags. So for example, providing an opportunity for a service to say which SLO budget algorithms it supports. So OpenSLO currently has 3, and well, Captain has 0, so it would be one of the gaps. And on another side, we basically, in Captain, we strongly utilize comparisons against the baseline. So for us, since we integrate Captain in the CD tools, for us it's normal that we compare current data, for example, performance metrics, with the previous release to do some decisions, for example, as a part of progressive delivery A/B testing. And for us, it would be important to also make it a kind of a part of the specification, so that you would be able to define relative requirements compared to a baseline. So to some extent, OpenSLO already supports it by percentages, but maybe some explicit definition would be nice, because in Kaplan we can do percentages against the previous evaluation, like OpenSLO basically suggests, but also against the baseline through a separate format definition. So this is basically key gaps I was able to identify through the research. But I think that for us, it would be quite interesting. And again, we could also contribute some bits to upstream, like Kaplan events. So basically what we have at the moment, we can also adjust the formats, but I think that it would be really interesting for OpenSLO adopters as well if we had standard eventing interface.
So I had a question about the comparison against baseline. So usually the way I have seen that handled is on has to do with kind of the sort of query functionality of what the metric source or the data source supports. So for instance, you can do some sort of a time-based delta where you're saying, give me the delta from this compared to, 24 hours ago, or, something like that. And so I mean, that in of itself is a solution that then kind of offloads that ability to the query of the support of the data source. I guess I'm curious if either I'm misunderstanding the use case that you have, or if there's some specific idea that how you envision kind of bringing that into the spec.
Yep, no, you're perfect. So you get it totally right. So the thing in Kaplan is that we basically do both at the same time. So this is an example of Kaplan's SLO file, and here we basically have support for definitions like that. So with percentages, etc., is basically difference compared to the previous time frame, to the previous evaluation. So this is what you mean, and this is what is already supported in OpenSLO. So we could say that we would like to have the same format for baseline comparisons, but for us, the thing that we would like to do both at the same time. So it would require some kind of duplication for the metrics, for criteria, or maybe another syntax that would allow us to say that for this particular SLI, we would like to do a comparison against the baseline. So
would you imagine that like with a baseline query? So kind of like how right now we've got like the query for good metrics versus bad metrics. This would be like a separate query statement for the baseline.
Yeah, so how it would happen in Kaplan right now? So yeah, basically when you define this related criteria, when you do the evaluation, SLO evaluation service can contact SLI provider and say that I need the data for this particular version. And basically, SLI provider constructs a query which goes to our observability provider and just puts the data. So basically, for us in Kaplan, is just a way to build a query here that is also a bit abstract. Though I have to admit that this part is still version specific. So, for example, I'm just showing the demo. So, for example, we have Prometheus provider in this demo. And here, basically, we have a bunch of PromQL. But here, as you can see, there is some parameters, so, which we basically receive from the SLO evaluation service. So it provides us with some data, including project, stage, which is basically also baseline, etc. And then this data goes to the observability provider as a query.
Yeah, I'll just at face value, I'd say I kind of like the idea of having a ability to do that in kind of an abstract way by saying just here's the query that you use to find the baseline, and here's the query you use to find the current stuff. Simply because right now, with kind of what I had described, the ability to do those sort of comparisons is limited to whether or not the data source supports a delta function. And this approach would then allow the computational load for that to be offloaded upwards. It wouldn't preclude you from using a delta function if you wanted to, but if you wanted to bring the baseline comparison into the SLO implementer, that would, your data source no longer needs to support a delta function.
Exactly. Which is not trivial for some data sources. So for example, this is why we try to make the service abstract. So for example, Dynatrace basically supports SLO budgets, deltas, etc. right away in this query language. With regards to Prometheus, I would say that with some hacks you can achieve that. With Datadog, not that much, but well, still there is a lot of flexibility there, and we wanted to just have fully abstract way to define it here, and then put all the complexity on SLI adapters. So this is why I would like to probably discuss how it would be in OpenSLO format if we have possibility to add that, but probably it's not an immediate thing. If there are discussions about OpenSLO version 2, it would be definitely a good time to discuss it. Yes, Mahesh?
So while I definitely followed all of this and understood all of it and have many contributions to contribute, and I thought this and ideas, is there any, can you like leave a bunch of sources that would explain it in greater detail for, definitely not me because I've gotten all of this for sure, but to other people that will need to like go through it to actually fully grasp it, to think through the implications for the OpenSLO spec?
Yeah, 1 or 2
asking
weeks
for a
ago,
friend.
I posted the presentation on the OpenSLO Slack channel. I got some initial feedback, but yeah, I agree with you that I don't have complete proposal how to put an OpenSLO specification at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, just like the problem, like even a base idea what you want in the specification with links to the explanation of the reasoning, what the thing is, like why you need it.
I would love to read about it.
Yeah, my friend is asking about like that thing.
Would maybe it makes sense for us to have some like an issue label specifically around Captain support? That way, I feel like there's a number of different things that Oleg's laid out here, and putting them all into one like mega issue could start getting really difficult to follow them all. And maybe if we were to kind of granularize them, start with at least a couple of the main ones that that have been laid out as separate issues, we label them as Captain specific, and then we can kind of dive into those in a more isolated context.
Yep, it would be definitely interesting. So again, from my side, there is no concrete timeline for implementation. So we do some tinkering in another project, Captain Lifecycle Controller. Basically, there we introduce operator-based approach. So SLIs and SLOs become CRDs. And then there would be operator, basically partially based on the Captain code base that does all the evaluations, again, sense all the data, but in a fully cloud native way. So it's probably too early, but if someone is interested at one of the next meetings, I can present it because it already works. Yeah, so for me, that project is right now is a top priority, but how I see that, so what I call project Lighthouse. So for this Lighthouse controller and this cloud native implementation would be merged at some point, and we would also take OpenSLO.
I'll be very interested in that, because right now my current role is the development and maintenance of a Helm chart that we are currently looking at how we can start to support some observability specific CRDs in. So I'd be very interested in hearing more about that in the future.
Okay, and then I think that I can just show how we do it at the moment, late the next meeting probably, and then we can. I will create issues for particular changes I would like to see.
Awesome, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'll put you down on the agenda for that.
Okay, then I think, well, basically this is what I wanted to present today, but yeah, it's just heads up that we are looking into that. And probably there will be more contributors joining later.
Awesome.
Before we end, quick thought. The versioning of objects is a great idea, but we by default embed the objects inside other objects without any versioning hints. So what do we do with that? Because that's a primary issue to solve. Like by definition, the SLI is in the body of the SLO, and
Yeah,
it
you
implies
can
the version.
inline it, right?
Yeah,
I
so
would
I was just going to say, like, there's a reference syntax that Kubernetes uses that includes that, I believe, so that you specify it, so that if you have to, it assumes that you're going by the current version or something. If you don't prefix it, if you do prefix it with the API version, it knows to go look in the other API version for the object that you're looking for, or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly, but it has to do with the reference syntax, I believe.
We'll need to look it up, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just, hot take. I would say that it would inherit, like, so for any that are inlined, as well as any that are like referenced, I would say that they would inherit the parent
By default, but how do you override it? We need the syntax to override it. Preferably one that's established, but if not, then.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I would lean towards that. If you inline, you have to use the parents. If you reference, you can specify another. Otherwise, it might get really weird with our validation of objects and things like that. But
I really didn't want to hear that at the end of the meeting.
Apologies.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody have any other last minute items?
I was going to ask, there was an issue made by Kuba that we can put the specification on our site, like using the markdown link. Is it okay if I will prepare it? Is it a cool idea?
To directly pull from our GitHub to our website without going to GitHub, and we can have it always in sync because we just render what is under raw URL from GitHub on our website to make it even easier discoverable.
Yeah, to have spec on site in the end.
Yeah, directly from GitHub.
On the Noble 9 site.
No, on the OpenSLO.
No, OpenSLO.
Oh, OpenSLO.com would have an embedded.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry, it would have an embedded what?
Spec.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
I was
not
confused for a long
pasting,
time as
but
well.
referencing and rendering directly from source from GitHub.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I think if we had a more presentable version of it on the website, I think that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. It was my idea because Hugo is all Markdown, and on GitHub we have Markdown, so probably there is a possibility to render it directly on website from the URL.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have fun with Hugo and prepare something.
Perfect.
Show you, I guess, next time.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.